Yeah, it's been about 18 years now. And the gap that I was trying to fill is when I heard all of the analysis and commentary on the current state of humanity and how tyranny was encroaching. And, we were basically, living under a control slash enslavement system. What I constantly heard from people in the alternative media community were um, so-called solutions that were all based in externalizing power and external factors to the self. Um, it was people who did not really understand, in my estimation, from my personal experience, who and what they were really up against, nor did they have a complete understanding or even an accurate understanding of what would be necessary to change in order to change the outcome. And that's why I wanted to put together a comprehensive um, presentation slash worldview understanding of what was really taking place and what would truly be needed to change to enact the solution. One of the things I always hear from detractors is that I'm not speaking any solutions. And I tell people that all of my work has been the solution from day one. You just don't understand what I'm saying. And that's a sad thing to have to say to other people, is that you're literally not quite intelligent enough to actually hear what's being said to you. But that's literally the case when it comes to a lot of the freedom community, sadly. I don't want it to be that way. It just is that way. They believe the most ridiculous and erroneous things about what's going to solve this problem. They think it's going to be a financial solution. They think it's going to be primarily a political solution. If you don't understand that politics is divisive and not the answer and not going to solve anything, you really don't understand life at this point, as far as I'm concerned. And or maybe they think it's going to be a technological solution or a solution regarding food or religion or whatever they could possibly imagine or envision is the most wildly off basis so-called solutions, pseudo solutions, non-solutions that you could ever possibly imagine. And that's what I was seeing back then. And they've only gotten more erroneous and more ridiculous as time progressed. The political analysis community, which is what really the freedom community largely amounts to. I mean, I wouldn't use the term entirely to paint with a broad brush or make a blanket statement, but it is largely the so-called freedom community, which I don't believe is a freedom community. I believe it is a wildly off base wishers for freedom. That's basically what we have. We have people who say they want freedom and don't want to listen to what the real solutions are or what the real changes that have to take place internally within the individual for freedom to ever possibly manifest. They don't want to hear that. They certainly don't want to do that work. So this is why I got involved, is to explain to people that all of the political analysis is exactly akin to looking at the patterns on furniture on a sinking ship and go, wow, that ottoman there by the couch or by the chair has such interesting fabric on it. I'm going to go over there with a microscope and study the threads. And meanwhile, there's a gigantic hole in the ship and it's sinking. This is literally what we are undergoing and experiencing. And since that time, back in 2007, when I really began formulating, really, it was honestly in 2005 when I really started waking up and fully waking up and really understanding what I had experienced, what was really going on, put together all the pieces of the puzzle in my own head around that time, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. I say my initial awakening was 9/11 and the aftermath of it. Really understood that it was an inside job and a complete false flag by around early 2002, a few months after the event. And my subsequent, further awakening probably progressed until around 2005, where I would say I knew what the solutions really were as far as what type of spiritual internal work and waking up to true morality had to happen. I didn't start my public work. I had started formulating the What on Earth is Happening presentation in early 2006, and I started delivering that in late 2007, working on it for, basically that entire year. So 2007 began my public work, and that was the gap that I was trying to fill. To answer your question, is present the real solutions instead of pseudo solutions that the freedom community is hallucinating. The so-called freedom community is imagining and under the illusion that they're going to make any headway into real freedom by implementing. The real solution is the understanding of true objective morality under natural law and aligning one's behavior to it, and doing that through a process of deep internal spiritual work with the self, which is what shadow work is ultimately all about.
How has your work changed since you've started, stylistically, emotionally? How has your approach shifted from that beginning time to more recent times?
Great question. I initially started on internet radio stations, doing an audio only show and podcast. That morphed into a video show with higher production values and a lot more intricacy of visuals, which I think is a lot more effective because you can show slides as you present ideas. But what I think is the most interesting part of that question is how the content of my work changed and how my emotional state changed as time progressed. My content shifted from, in my early work, I was presenting about the control system, all of the methodologies of control and mind control that are employed against us by the social engineers that run our planet. I was really deeply talking about the occult and occult traditions and systems, and the symbology thereof and practices. And a lot of people were very into this early work. They supported me tremendously and were I was just the love of people's hearts back then, let me tell you, because everybody wants to externalize everything and point fingers outward and say that's the problem, they're the problem. And I'm not saying that my work was bad or that it did harm, but it was too externalized for people who really shouldn't have received a notion of it's not you that has to change, it's they're the problem. I was projecting that way too much in my early work, as far as I'm concerned. I probably would have maybe gone back and did it slightly differently, but nonetheless, I think that's important information to very much understand. It really puts things in perspective and paints a framework of who's really doing the enslavement to humanity, why they're doing it, what their mental framework and their worldview is, the systems that they use, the techniques they use, the symbolism they use. It's all very important to understand. I would not teach that. Like, I think that needs to be taught and understood. The problem is when it's there's so much complexity involved in that, and there's so much detail involved in that. You have to spend a lot of time to unpack that. And I spent the better portion of a year and a half to close to 2 years simply talking about that aspect of this control system. And when you do that, it gets people into a loop of thinking. It gets them into thinking this is all factors outside of us. This is nothing I need to do anything about. This is just, oh, we just, he's going to make people aware of this and then things are suddenly going to change. And that was never my intention. I always understood the spiritual aspect of things. I was simply trying to present the information in a stepwise progression to get people from point A to point B. And I think I did a great job of that, quite frankly. I think I have a very logically structured presentation and podcast series with visuals, with slides, that really unfolds someone's worldview over time. And that was my intention. The problem is that the community of, let's say, people who want to analyze the control system and people who say that they want freedom are very much people who believe that these are somehow external factors, that they don't have to get personally involved, that they don't have to change their own thinking. They believe they're fine the way they are. They believe the problem is not created or generated by their worldview, how they are thinking, what they believe, and what they erroneously believe the solutions are. So as I encountered as my work shifted away from explaining external factors, because I felt I had done more than enough of that, I turned toward internal spiritual work that is very, very, very introspective and very, very demanding and difficult of the individual to embark upon. And when my work shifted from those external factors of explaining the control system and its methodologies to completely turning inward and looking at how the individual sees the world, functions in the world, their belief systems, what they are thinking, feeling, and doing, and what they believe the actual solutions to the world crisis of control and enslavement and the destruction of freedom and the division of humanity into more and more violence and degeneration. When I tried to explain that the internal factors are far more important to understand and implement than the external factors, and I realized that there was unbelievably deep resistance to that very notion. Forget about doing any of those things. Even hearing that that's the issue at hand and that's what needs to be worked upon. The unimaginable amount of resistance that came out of the woodwork was so colossal and overwhelming that I really emotionally felt completely attacked and betrayed, quite frankly. I realized how far away people's minds were from the real answer and how committed they were to staying exactly in the same mindset that they had always been in life, other than realize, hey, there's people out there that want to control and enslave me and my loved ones. That's about it. And understanding that, ladies and gentlemen, does not take a damned rocket science or genius, a rocket scientist or genius. Any person as dim as a very dull-edged butter knife, okay, as dim-witted as that, can figure that out by this point in time. If you can't figure that out by this point in time, there's something very seriously wrong with your cognitive abilities. But good for people who figure that out. Wonderful. You're not special. You're not unique. You haven't done anything earth-shattering. You haven't done anything absolutely astounding. Okay? That's the very beginning of the change that needs to take place. The problem is people stay right there. They don't budge in their worldview and in their understanding. And they just say they want to attribute it to external factors or groups and say, it's all the Freemasons, it's all the Jews, it's all the Jesuits, it's all the Rosicrucians, whatever. And they sound like infantile children who really don't have the ability to reason. Because if you think there's anything that unidimensional in life in general, you're delusional. It's complete illusory thinking. It's complete degenerative thinking. It's complete childish thinking is what it is. And when I start explaining that to people and trying to get them to understand that the internal spiritual state has to change for external factors in the world to change. There's so much resistance to that because they're trapped in all kinds of illusions and religious thought. And when I say religious thought, it has to be quantified and defined. It has to be understood from the perspective I'm using the term religious thought or religion. I do not only mean the traditional cultural religions. And I have to say this in every interview for new people who may not be familiar with what I'm talking about in my work. I do not mean just Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, etc. Religious thought means any erroneous form of thinking. And erroneous means false. It means it's not aligned with truth. It's not aligned with what actually exists in nature. It's a false constructural idea of the mind. That's what I mean by erroneous thought. It's an erroneous belief system that takes us further and further away from truth, further and further away from the natural law understanding, further and further away from understanding what real moral principles are, instead of religious, nonsensical, relative, quote unquote, morality that then if it is ever even seen as how ridiculous it is by, people who once subscribed to it or people who don't subscribe to religion, they then want to throw the idea of morality out, which is equivalent to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You don't throw out the understanding of true morality just because you understand that religious systems and systems of completely erroneous belief include false teachings of morality and a false understanding of what morality actually is. So I am trying to bring people to the understanding there is true objective morality. Aligning with it is the path to freedom and is the solution to the system of slavery in place in our world. How anybody could not hear that I'm presenting solutions and say I'm not solution oriented, they are low IQ. That's the only way that I could put it. They're degenerate thinkers. They're not higher minded people. They're simply degenerate, low IQ individuals. And uh, as I've said, I've explained from day one what the actual solution is. The actual solution is alignment of our behavior. It's a restructuring of our worldview. It's doing internal spiritual shadow work upon the self to reevaluate one's worldview and come to the understanding of true objective moral principles, which you then align your behavior to in life. When the aggregate of humanity does that, freedom results. Freedom is not for an immoral people. Freedom is only for a truly moral people that have their actions, their worldview, their emotions, and their actions aligned with true objective morality under natural law. And let me just conclude briefly. That is the gap that I attempted to fill because hardly anyone on this planet is speaking about those things.
Right.
They're all analyzing political and financial situations, and that is not the solution. Those are pseudo solutions. And what I'm talking about is the real solution to human freedom. Whether anybody believes it or understands it or not, it's still objectively true. And it's testable. It's a science. It's not a belief. It's not a religion. It's a science of morality. It's a science of behavior is exactly what it is. And people may down the line eventually understand it. They absolutely don't right now. They're unbelievably resistant to even considering it. They scoff at these notions. They think I've gone off the deep end or something for being as angry as I've gotten over people not understanding it over 18 goddamn years. Okay. And it doesn't matter what those people think ultimately. It's still true nonetheless, and humanity will either understand it and prosper and eventually become free, or they'll extinct themselves. That's how things are going to go because free will is operating in the universe. So you could ignore it at your own peril, or you could try to understand it and make the world a better place. Those are people's options.
And it's like you said, the two reasons that you provided there that people don't want to hear those solutions, but then they also claim that you're not providing them. So they kind of go hand in hand, right? That willful ignorance of what you're saying as the solutions, they can try to pinpoint and say, okay, I don't agree with that point, but they're not even hearing the point, and it kind of relates to the fact that they don't want to, right?
They don't want the responsibility that comes with true knowledge of how things work. That's all it really boils down to. Knowledge, and especially deep occult knowledge about what is really generating conditions within humanity, which is what the occultists completely understand, and they're trying to hide from humanity's understanding so that they can continue to control and enslave them. That kind of deep knowledge carries deep personal responsibility with it. That's why people don't want to understand it. They want to remain ignoramuses. They want to remain completely irresponsible people. They believe they can never truly shirk personal responsibility for what's going on. But guess what? You can't, because the universe is ultimately going to hold you to account for your ignorance or for your lack of true right action in this world.
And Why is natural law central to your message? You ended on that a second ago, that's really
Yes.
why it's become central to your message. So let's just go right into that and the work that you've done around that topic.
So natural law is the universal, non-man-made, eternal, objective, and immutable conditions that ultimately govern human behavioral choice. It governs the free will consequences of beings that have the capacity for holistic intelligence, meaning it does not apply to lower animals, it applies to human beings and higher life forms. Who have the capacity for truly understanding the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior objectively. And that doesn't mean that they do understand it. It means they have the capacity to understand it. It means they have the brain power, they have the nervous system and the type of brain that is capable of reason, that is capable of judgment and reason, and truly understanding differences between behaviors and why certain behaviors are moral and preferable and other behaviors are immoral and not preferable to an outcome. And there is a law within natural law consequence that I refer to as the law of freedom. It's a law of consequentialism. It means that if we behave in certain ways in the collective, in the aggregate, then we're going to receive an outcome in the aggregate. And if we behave in different ways in the aggregate, we're going to receive a different outcome. It's very simple, logical understanding of how natural processes work and the consequences of laws work, no different than the understanding of the consequences of any physical law. If you hold a piece of paper in a fire, it is going to burn up. Okay, that's just a physical law. If you put a fork with an unprotected hand into an electrical outlet, you are going to be shocked by electricity, an active electrical outlet. That's a natural law. It is a physical law, but it is a natural law. It is a law within the boundaries of the laws of nature. Behavioral law works the exact same way within nature. It's a law that is operating in the universe that requires an understanding of something in order to align your behavior to it. This is why, if we have an important document, we don't put it over a flame. This is why, if we don't want to be electrocuted, we don't stick a fork in an electrical outlet, because we have an accurate understanding, at least to the extent that we need to, of how those physical laws work. Well, if you don't want enslavement and if you don't want complete destruction upon your entire civilization, you learn what natural law regarding behavior is. Just like if you don't want to get electrocuted, you learn how electricity works, not to stick a fork in an outlet. So it's a very simple, practical, natural understanding of laws that are operating all around us in human life, in daily life. And the main law within it is, as as morality increases, freedom increases. And we're talking about in the aggregate. We mean collectively over the body of humanity. This is how karma works over an entire species. I would say, yes, there is such a thing as individuated karma, as individuated consequentialism or cause and effect of your behavior, but it is not as easily seen in life in certain instances as if you study the progression of how karma works over time over a species. And that's what natural law reveals. That's how natural law reveals itself unto us and is understandable. It is knowable. It is, we can even experiment with it if we wanted to. Okay. It is objective. It is knowable. It has boundary conditions that are testable and understandable, just like any other law of nature, just like any other science. It is a science of behavior. As morality increases, freedom increases over the aggregate of a civilization. As morality declines, freedom declines, and we go deeper into bondage and enslavement. So all you have to do to understand the effect, which people will make the recognition and acknowledgement that it is tyranny, control, and slavery. And the more intelligent people will understand it's ultimately eugenics and moving toward depopulation and ultimately extinction. If you understand those are the results, then all you have to do is go back and look at what the cause is. The cause is immoral behavior, immoral thought, immoral behavior. Belief in nonsensical, wrong ideas that ultimately lead to immoral behavior. And that's the cause. And only removing the cause, only changing the causal factor will ever lead to a change in result. This is what the unintelligent do not recognize. They don't understand the link of causation. They don't get that if you think and behave a certain way, and that's how the main aggregate of the body of humanity thinks and behaves, you're inexorably and invariably moving toward the outcome of enslavement. And if you change that worldview and you change that thinking from an internal spiritual perspective, the outcome is going to change as the aggregate body of humanity changes in those capacities over time. It is not that difficult to figure out, ladies and gentlemen. It just takes observation, and it takes the understanding of our current orientation and where we are really at as far as the human condition is concerned. And if you understand that, then you truly should understand the factors that are involved, and you should then come to a logical understanding of the true solution, which is the understanding of objective morality, not religious morality, but true objective morality, and aligning your behavior to those things by not doing the wrongdoings under objective, natural law based morality. Just don't do the wrongdoings, and the situation will actually organically revolve itself. The problem is we don't understand what rights are because we don't understand what the wrongdoings are, and we think certain people have the right to do those wrongdoings, namely government. We believe in this religion, this completely erroneous notion called authority. And we think people are allowed to do the natural law wrongdoings just because they have some name attached to themselves, or some badge, or some costume called a uniform, or some position in society. No, they don't. No one is exempt from the laws of morality. They're the same for everyone. Everyone has the same rights, and the wrongdoings are the same for everyone as well. If we don't engage in the wrongdoings and we simply act only upon our rights of what we are actually endowed to do, because those actions do not initiate harm to other sentient beings, the situation actually organically resolves itself. That is actually the solution. It has been presented an innumerable, ridiculous amount of times. People can't hear it as such because they're so under mind control, they're so under deception, they're so under erroneous thinking. They're just, their brains are burnt, is what it really comes down to. The chemicals in the food, air, and water have burnt their brains. They can't think straight. They can't reason. They don't have any logical faculties within the mind anymore. They've been really reduced to the thinking of pretty much the animal kingdom. Sadly, that's a sad, tragic thing to have to say and acknowledge. But that's how degraded and debased human beings have become in our society in the modern age, in the modern day. If we want to uplift ourselves out of that condition, it is absolutely possible with a lot of hard work. It doesn't happen magically. It doesn't happen automatically. Good doesn't automatically defeat evil. Improvement doesn't automatically occur just because you wish it to. It takes unbelievably hard, disciplined work upon the self to come out of nonsensical thinking. And I could tell you, I know that that's the case. That's not just something I'm saying to make people feel good, because I was one of these idiots. I was one of the delusional, completely burnt-brained idiots in my youth. That's what led me into the dark occult. That's, ironically, what let me see a lot of the control system, because I was so stubborn and imbecilic back then, and my brain was completely broken and not working correctly to such an extent that I actually went in with the social engineers and tried to help them destroy humanity for years of my life. That's how completely erroneously burnt brain my thinking, erroneous and burnt brain my thinking was. I don't exempt myself from those words and the conditions that I'm trying to explain. I worked 24/7 practically for over a decade to fix my thinking. nonstop. And you know what? That work still is ongoing because I've still experienced trauma and traumatizing situations in my life that I have to do shadow work to work upon and recover from. That's ongoing to this minute, to this exact second, you know? And that's why I don't exempt myself from any of this. I'll talk about all my experiences and my erroneous belief systems and religions, and I shed them. I shed them over immense, disciplined work over more than a decade of my life, and continue to do that kind of shadow work. And this is what people resist, because do you know what it takes? It takes being honest with yourself. It takes absolutely telling yourself things that you do not want to hear about the person who you currently are. That's why people say, you want to tell me the problem lies with me and in my internal state and my mindset and my worldview? I'm turning 180 degrees. No, you're the problem. I'm out. And you're the problem for even saying that it's me or it's people like me or it's just humanity in general and their screwed up thinking. And this is why people hate my later work. They'll say, oh, go listen to Passio's early work. Don't bother with his later stuff. You know what that means? I tell people, you know exactly what that means. You don't understand one thing I said from day one. Zero. No understanding whatsoever. You stayed completely stagnant. You didn't learn. You didn't grow at all. My later work is my most critically important work because it's not only going to show you what the real solution is instead of just endlessly looking into Satanism or the occult or symbolism or secret societies or control methodologies. It's going to make you turn inward and look at how are you contributing to the problem? How is your distorted thinking contributing to the problems of humanity? How are you staying in your current mindset and worldview actually lending to the continuation of the human condition of slavery? And guess what? It's practically everything. Without changing your worldview, without changing your understanding of the dynamics involved and understanding natural law and aligning your behavior to it, you are on a sinking ship and you're looking at the other end of the ship where all the water is at, and you're like, glad the hole's not in my end. That's how dumb people like that are. They're dumb as stumps. And I told them so, right? I'm not a shy person. I'm not a person who's worried about any kind of repercussions. Believe me, I made my peace with life and death the minute I told the Satanists that I was working with and trying to help enslave humanity at one point. Not really enslave, but doing the work to basically put humanity under a delusional spell. Okay. Once I realized it was ultimately about enslavement is when I had my crisis of conscience and changed my mind to work with them. But when I was working with them, you know, I fully understood where they were trying to take humanity. And it's like since then, I have been trying to blow the whistle on that and explain it to people. And what they told me about people's mindset, sadly, has been true. And they said they're under such a delusional trance, they're under such thrall is the word that they use for it, which literally means a state of being placed under someone else's control like a puppet. They said they're under such thrall, nobody can wake them out of it, even us. These occultists said even if we tried to change their mindset, we wouldn't be able to do it. I don't necessarily believe that that's possible. I think that's their understanding of it. I think if a huge amount of people really worked on people and really put the truth out to humanity in a continuous way, we could take people out of this trance and out of their current worldview. The problem is they're comfortable there. They want to stay there. And they believe that external factors, political analysis, financial analysis is somehow the answer or the solution, and it's not. What I just laid out and told people is the answer and the solution. The problem is they're too hard-headed to realize it, and it's very unpopular because it places the burden upon the individual. It's not looking outward and saying, oh, it's this group, that group, these people, that people. It's about turning inward and saying, what's my role in all of this? What's all other people, the average person's role in all this? And how do we have to change our minds and our behaviors? And people don't want to do that because that's a shake up to their life. That's a shake up to their lifestyle in almost all cases. And they don't want that. They want to remain comfortable in their little bubble of existence. And that's why when I later in my work, realized that this was the resistance that I was up against regarding the people who even state, yes, I want true freedom. It's all lip service. When I started realizing that it's just lip service and they just want a new episode. You want a new television show. The people out there in the freedom movement. You don't want real freedom. You want to be entertained. You think this is entertainment. You think this is social hour. You think this is some comedy show. You think this is some new television episode that you want to see how it unfolds. It's none of those things. It's life and death. And if yesterday didn't tell you and teach you that this is a matter of life and death, then nothing ever fucking will. And I'm of course referring to Charlie Kirk's assassination, which is horrendous and reprehensible. And this is the path that we're heading down. This is what I've been trying to avert by teaching people that they have to work upon themselves and heal their worldview. I've been trying to avert this kind of violence and escalation and what's going to eventually lead to warfare, to asymmetric urban warfare at some point. I've been trying to avert that outcome of chaos and death since day one, because I understood these factors. And that's why I've gotten so harder and harder and harder on people. The velvet glove of Mark Passio came off a long time ago, and I started hitting bare knuckled viciously, and I'm of course mean philosophically, not actually physically. But, people hate that. They want you to blame it on external factors and say it has nothing to do with you, because they don't want the responsibility that goes hand in hand with truly changing and coming into true knowledge of what the real solution is. And that's why I've taken it so hard on people, especially lately, because at this point, ladies and gentlemen, there should be so much more progress than what there is. There should be so much more understanding of the causal factors and what the real solution is. My message should be everywhere by this point, literally dripping from everywhere. And you know where it is? It's nowhere. It's practically nowhere. It's in such a tiny hidden corners of cyberspace. It is practically not in anyone's mind. It is practically not in anyone's mouth. And that's literally the problem, is that the true solution hasn't been identified and amplified. And it has been by a tiny few people in what you might call the natural law community, the true freedom community, the freedom community that understands that in order to be free, humanity must first be moral and good. And that's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of people. It's an insignificantly tiny percentage of people. And until that message gets amplified greatly by people who you want to see what's going on in the world and you're confused and you don't understand and you're horrified, listen to this message, ladies and gentlemen. This is the message that has to be paid attention to and listened to, not because I'm saying it. Many, many thousands of people throughout the history of this planet have said it an innumerable amount of times. They've worded it in a million different ways. Okay? I'm nobody special because I understand it. And neither is anybody else just because they happen to understand it. The message is what's important, not the individual speaking it. My message, the message, has to get out there to people. It has to be understood, it has to be amplified, and it has to grow. Or we're going to see more incidences of completely mindless, senseless violence, of people thinking that they just go around killing somebody that they disagree with, of, escalation of tension leading to war. And I don't want to see that. I never have. I will be prepared if that eventuality and that sick, unfortunate outcome occurs. I'll be ready. I'm not going to, I changed my mindset about that a long time ago, because I was like, oh, I'll just give up on the first day and die. And then I thought about it and I'm like, no, my message is too important to just give up like that. I'll be ready in the eventuality of when violence in that capacity comes my way. I'm going to try to survive it because my message is too important not to. So, I don't want to see that outcome. And I've told people from day one, this is the solution to avoiding that outcome.
And it's like you've said, I mean, the external world is a reflection of really what's going on inside of us. So if we're seeing escalation of violence or continuation of it, that doesn't mean, oh, there's all this violence happening out here in the world, you know? It's okay, that's violence happening inside of ourselves. We're doing the violence internally to ourselves by ignoring this information, or dozens of other things that we'll do to avoid taking responsibility. Like you said, it's a form of self violence to the self, right? And then what do we see erupting in around us? So to me, it's not surprising. Oh, some guy gets assassinated, you know, at a university. I'm not surprised at all. You know, I'm not surprised there's not more of that happening with the amount of ignorance that people are in, because like you said, it's just a reflection of your internal state, what's happening or outside. So you got, you know, school shootings going on and everything else, but we have a mass violence happening inside of people, if that's the case, right? If we're having these little blips happening outside in the real world, oh my God, what's going on? Well, yeah, exactly. We've been ignoring this information. We've been ignoring ourselves. We've been
Sorry.
ignoring the knowledge of the self this whole time.
Yep.
So,
And,
yeah.
people think that just any kind of ignorance is someone's right. Lots of ignorance is a right for an individual. Tons of different kinds of ignorance. I'm drinking a glass of iced tea right now. I do not have to know how to cultivate and grow and harvest the kind of tea that I'm drinking right now. Okay, that is, I am absolutely within my rights to remain ignorant of all those processes. But there's other kinds of ignorance that we do not have a right to engage in and just stay in that mindset. And that is, how does freedom work? What is true morality? What behaviors do initiate harm to other sentient beings? We don't have the right to remain ignorant of those things. And again, that's the underpinning and the basis of natural law-based morality. And not learning those things is not a right. You are in that form of ignorance over the most important things in life, which ultimately generates the conditions that many, many other billions of people need to live in, is not a right. That's not a form of ignorance that is a right. When you stay in that ignorance, you're a bad person. And this is what I'm saying. Willful ignorance regarding natural law in the presence of an immense amount of knowledge regarding it is actually the measure of a bad person. That's what makes someone a bad person, is they don't have any care or concern for what is right versus wrong. And let's define that briefly. A right is an action that does not initiate harm to other sentient beings. Everything that does not initiate harm against another sentient being is reserved as a human right. Therefore, what are the wrongdoings that do violate natural law, that do violate objective morality and other people's natural rights, especially the right to remain unharmed? Well, those are 7 behaviors. 7 behaviors which harm or diminish or defraud other people. If you are harming, diminishing, defrauding from another person, you are conducting harm against them in the objective world. This isn't about hurting people's feelings by telling them something that they don't want to
Yeah, and
hear
you're not
right
just
now.
calling
That's
them
not
bad because you're judgy or something, right? That's not
right.
what's
That
happening here.
we're talking about objective states of harm and diminishment in real objective reality and nature.
Right, from a
So
holistic
it's
worldview. It's not just
demonstrable
a
harm.
random
So
statement.
what we saw yesterday is the first of them, murder. And that's a political assassination, which is a form of murder. You're murdering someone, you're taking their life without right. Well, what is taking life without right? It's theft. You stole a life that doesn't belong to you to take. So that's a form of theft. Assault, you're stealing bodily well-being, like breaking someone's arm or hitting them in the jaw and knocking teeth out. You're diminishing from the person health-wise and bodily well-being, which the body is the individual's property. So what are you doing to property? You're destroying or diminishing from property. That's a form of theft. No different than if you go and break somebody's windows for no reason, or you kick in their door and break the door and the door frame. You've damaged property. That's a form of theft. You're diminishing from someone's property. Well, assault is bodily diminishment without right. So that's a form of theft. Rape, sexual association without right to do so. Forcing sex on someone, that's taking their free will sexual association from them. And you're often doing that with direct bodily violence, which is assault. So that's a form of theft, taking something that doesn't belong to you. Physical theft is taking property that doesn't belong to you. That's the definition of theft. So you're taking items that don't belong to you. And then you have trespass. Trespass is stealing the comfort or safety of someone's living domain or private space that they've, basically cordoned off for their own use, for their own living or use. That's a form of theft, is trespass upon someone's property. Again, it all has to do with property and theft. Coercion, you're taking someone's free will ability to make their own choices in life away from them. And that's a form of theft. You don't have the right to take someone's free will away from them. And the only exception to that is if they're doing harm to another, they're initiating harm to another being, you have a right to stop them. That's called arrest, or the stopping of the individual from continuing to initiate harm. So coercion is a form of theft. You're taking free will from someone that you don't have the right to take. And coercion, you're taking the truth away, or you're diminishing from someone's active understanding of the truth and their ability to make informed decisions and exercise judgment in their own lives. That's a form of theft. If you willfully and knowingly are lying to someone to deceive them. Every wrongdoing, and by the way, these are the true 7 deadly sins, not the 7 deadly sins of the ridiculous religion of churchianity, which is they say that the real 7 deadly sins are pride, gluttony, sloth, lust, anger, jealousy, and greed. All internalized states or emotions. That's it. They're mental states or emotions. They're not actions. Remember, a right is an action that does not initiate harm to other sentient beings. A wrong is an action that does initiate harm to other sentient beings. I'm not saying these are great emotional or mental states to dwell in and stay in and not improve yourself, to try to exercise discipline not to continuously engage these states. But if I'm gluttonous and I eat too much on a particular day, I haven't harmed another being. I haven't initiated harm to another being. I may have created an upset stomach for myself, and maybe I'll, purge, later, if it's severe enough gluttony. But I'm not initiating harm to another. And that's the definition of harm. That's the definition of a wrong, a transgression against natural law. The real set of, I literally said to a person at a meetup, they were trying to tell me, oh, to lust is absolutely a sin. And I said, really? Like, you've never seen a pretty exceedingly attractive woman on the street, or, on a movie or something, and felt the emotion of lust as a man, because I was talking to another man, allegedly a man. And he says, yes, of course I have. And I think that that's sinful. I'm like, well, did you rape the person? And they know they got caught in a complete logical imbecilic fallacy of their own distorted thinking. And they wouldn't answer the question. I'm like, you need to take more than a millisecond to answer that question? Really? Because that means that you're really, really stupid, and you don't understand that lust isn't rape. One is an internal emotional state. One is an actual violent behavior that you conduct upon another. Or you may really have raped someone, which makes it even worse of why you're not answering. You either know you're completely defeated in your argument in a snap of fingers, or maybe you did rape someone. I'm like, so which is it? And this is where we're at in our society. The people want to be attached to their bullshit religious thought so deeply that they won't even answer a simple question. Have you ever raped somebody that you lusted after? Or felt lust regarding when you saw them? This shows you the qualitative difference between the nonsensical 7 deadly sins of churchianity versus the real 7 deadly sins under natural law. And I always tell people, listen, just say them aloud or listen to them spoken aloud and hear the qualitative difference in the language. Pride, gluttony, sloth, lust, anger, jealousy, greed. versus murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, deception. What do you think carries more weight and violence and seriousness? What do you think has more gravitas? The states of mind that, yes, I'm admitting aren't things to aspire to or stay in, because eventually, yes, they could lead to
Right.
bad behavior.
They may not be
But
the
in and
best
of
way
them,
to be
yeah,
those ways, yeah. But they're not what you're saying with the rights are actually actions that you're taking in the real physical world.
that's right.
Not that the world's purely physical either, but yeah. So, but juxtapose that to constitutional rights, right? These are also somewhat more in the positive. So it's still, what you're describing is more in the negative of the
Yes.
aspect of a right.
All natural rights can only truly be defined in the apophatic, meaning in the negative. Apophatic comes from it's a form of inquiry. It's an epistemological form of
Apophysis.
inquiry. Epistemology is how we understand reality, how we come to knowledge, the methodologies by which we come to knowledge. And the apophatic form of inquiry means that we are engaging in saying what the thing is not. So that's why I said a right is an action that does not initiate harm against another sentient being. Therefore, we have to understand what actions do initiate harm against another sentient being. When you know what rights are not by knowing the wrongdoings, the true seven deadly sins of murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, and deception, and they're all forms of theft, then you understand what a natural right is. It's a behavior that does not engage in those behaviors. It does not initiate harm by doing those seven things, which are ultimately one thing: stealing. Natural law can be boiled down to one law: don't steal. That's how simple the laws of the Creator are. The laws of nature, the laws of the Creator of the universe, the laws of karmic consequence, natural law boils down to two words. Three if you don't hyphenate. Do not steal. If you want to hyphenate it, don't steal. That's the end of the whole argument. That's the end of the whole issue. That's what it all boils down to in a nutshell. Ladies and gentlemen who have said over the years, Mark Passio doesn't prevent solutions. This is the one and only solution in all of life for freedom. You want to hear how you get freedom? Don't steal. Don't take anything that does not belong to you. Know what your true property is and what it is not. Align your behavior to that simple moral principle, and freedom will organically result. And that goes for everybody. There are no exceptions to the rule, no matter what position or costume you happen to be wearing. And that's the solution, boys and girls out there. I know it's a difficult thing. I said two words together with a period at the end: don't steal. But put your brain power to work for it, and I'm sure you can eventually understand it. Okay? The problem is you got too much garbage floating around and banging back and forth between the ears, and you're not truly listening. The mind is speaking, it's chattering. It's doing too much chatter endlessly. And we don't quiet the mind, and we can't hear the simplicity and the elegance and the true morality inherent to the solution. And that's because the mind is going nonstop with its bullshit religions. When we stop the mind from chattering with its nonsensical, imbecilic religious thought, the solution will present itself to us. But you know what? That voice never speaks above a whisper. It's not Mark Passio's voice, ladies and gentlemen. I happen to be a vehicle for it in the physical domain, but that real voice that is telling us what that solution is does not raise its voice like I do. It doesn't get real pissed off with you. It just says it at the most quiet whisper imaginable. Your mind has to be quiet enough to receive it. It's like a radio on a specific wavelength, and the message is there, but it's very faint, and it doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't broadcast at an unbelievably loud volume. It underlays everything. Our mind, as an antenna receiver for information, has to be tuned to that truth frequency and vibration. And that only happens when we quiet it from its mental chatter and unbelievable and multifarious forms of noise. And that's why shadow work involves the understanding of how to quiet the mind, how to engage in truly prosperous forms of meditation, not meditation to just numb yourself out, to go into a bliss trance state, which is just as bad as other religious forms of thought, to ignore the harm of the world, to ignore the evil taking place all around us. That's New Age nonsense meditative practices. This is what people want to do who are just into yoga for staying fit or trim, or, socializing with the other people who do it, or believing that meditation somehow makes you cool or centered or whatever, so you can then go and tolerate the crazy conditions of the world. That's not what meditation's there for, ladies and gentlemen. That's not what it is to be used for as a practical, useful tool. True transcendental meditation as a practical and useful tool will help you to quiet the mind from competing thoughts, so that you can truly understand what the real solutions are and what your real role to be, for you to be uptaken into the real role and the real work, what your dharma is, what you must do in the world, the kind of right action you must take in life. When you understand that, everything unfolds following that. But to get to that point, you have to be able to quiet the mind. It's a gigantic part of internal spiritual shadow work, of true shadow work.
Okay, so I think earlier you were talking about a unified worldview, or how people construct their worldview. And I've talked a little bit in my work about how that is not something that everybody does. Most people don't even understand that they're operating from a worldview. But this philosophy that you've put forth and put forward in your work does have a unifying component. And when you get pushed on that point, typically I've heard you say something like, who put these laws in motion? Where do these laws come from? Well, they come from the creator of the universe. And to me, that answer actually helps unify the worldview. It actually helps it all make sense and come together, that there is something acting, something that's acted from the beginning, or however you want to state it, that's put these laws into motion. And I think people resist that as well. So they may somewhat accept and hear what you're saying and start to, get along with the natural law. But when it has to come from a creator, I can't quite go that far with you. But to me, it's like, it doesn't make sense unless you add that component. So it's really just kind of taking the worldview and unifying it holistically.
These are the same kind of people, and I'll preface this by saying I'm neither a religionist or an atheist. I reject both of those false dichotomous paradigms and schisms, because that's what they are. They are dialectics. They are Hegelian dialectics for people to fall into, so that they never understand the truth of how our reality is structured and operates, which is knowable, which is not something that is unknowable. I say part of the worldview has to be the truth is knowable. The biggest lie and the biggest destruction of a healed worldview is that the truth is not knowable. Truth is knowable if we work hard enough to understand what's really taking place around us. That takes observation, that takes dedication, that takes intelligence, that takes care to learn and know what it is. It is not unknowable. The universe is not here to torment us with its unknowability. That's part of a sick, twisted, distorted, psychopathic worldview, that everything is here as a prison to torment us. No, it is not. This is not an evil domain. This is a domain of free will and consequence. Choice and consequence. That's the big lesson here, okay? Is how do you organize your choice? How do you structure and organize your free will choices so that you can gain maximum benefit? See, you could liken it to game theory, because natural law has been game theoried. The mathematician John Nash actually wrote about natural law mathematically in his paper called Equilibrium. They made a movie about it called A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly. Some of the best acted parts in, I think, all of film, and one of the best movies ever made. If people haven't seen it, watch that film. What's it about? Governing dynamics. That's the key thing in the film. That's what natural law is. How do you receive the maximum beneficial outcome? And that's what I'm trying to get people to see and understand. They're resistant to that because of religion, because they have a religion, whether it's a cultural religion, whether it's the religion of authority, whether it's the religion of scientism, whether it's the religion of atheism, doesn't matter. It's all erroneous thought. It's all, you don't have enough information and you think you do. See, that's where I perhaps went even overboard excessively in the other direction. The amount of information that I took in to understand what I understand, because I saw what I saw, it drove me into a state of over the top drive, into, let's just say what it is, obsession. It drove me into a state of complete obsession. I would absolutely say I became obsessed with understanding what was really going on in this world. When I got a little pull back of the curtain and a peek around the other side and saw who's running the game, who's running the show, what their ideology is, what their worldview is, what their methodologies are. And thank God I did, because I was a stubborn motherfucker, a really stubborn soul in my youth. Okay. Worse than you could possibly imagine. And it's almost like that was ordained or arranged for me. I don't even want to think about it like fate. I don't like that notion. Okay. I believe, yes, perhaps we are led in certain directions and then our behavior expresses those tendencies one way or another, right? I don't necessarily believe in just fate. I'm not a determinist. We could talk about that worldview in a moment. But when I was led to be able to take a peek behind the curtain behind the corridors of power in this world and see what it really was, that is when I was scared straight, you could say. That's what made my worldview start to crack, because I was just as stubborn as other people. And when I saw what was really running things, who was really running things and how, that's when I said, I've been wrong. And maybe without that experience, that wouldn't have happened. I don't know. I was pretty damn stubborn. Okay. So this is people's problem, is they're subscribing either to a worldview of religionism or atheism, which ultimately is all religionism. And this is why I tell people, it doesn't matter what false system of belief you're subscribing to, it's all religion. That's what religion is. It's a cage for the mind. And again, traditional religionists have a big problem with this and want to fight you on it because they're so cultishly addicted to their nonsensical cultural religions. And atheists and scientism believers want to fight you on this because they're so addicted to their non-belief in a creative underlying intelligence in nature and their, uh, absolutely stubborn attachment to government grant money funded science, which they think is real science. Okay. And we don't have real science operating in this world, quite frankly. We have very few places where real true science is actually operating. There are pockets of it, but it is not all the places that people refer to as science. I have news for you. Okay. I saw this firsthand working in a scientific institution, which most people have never worked in a scientific institution. And admittedly, my role was technology support, but I heard conversations and I heard people say, you think we're looking for cures here just because this is a medical research facility? We're looking for treatments. That's what brings grant money. That's what brings funding. You cure something, that puts this to bed. You don't ever speak that word. I heard department chief in the hematology oncology section of the University of Pennsylvania say that to one of his scientific assistants in his laboratory because he thought I wasn't in the room because I was under a desk unplugging Ethernet cables. Yeah. So you want to talk about science to me? I've been around scientific institutions. I worked in research laboratories. Okay. I know what goes on in there and I know how the paradigm is controlled by money. So again, I do not take a religious worldview, nor do I take an atheistic worldview. Those are Hegelian dialectics to divide people's mind and keep them away from the truth. The truth is, nature has a creative underlying intelligence. I don't care whether you want to call it God. You can call it the creative underlying intelligence inherent in nature. if you want to put it in as, quote, scientific a worldview as possible. Something created matter and the laws that govern it. Something that created the forces that ultimately govern matter. The laws that ultimately govern those forces. This is why we talk about the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of gravity, etc. We are governed by the laws that ultimately apply to behavior. People will think a complete atheist and a scientism believer will say everything in the universe is governed by law because they're reductionists to materialism. And then when you say, well, oh, is your behavior governed by law? Oh, no, that's different because consciousness is some random chaotic thing that happens in the brain and that's exempt from those laws. No, it isn't. And it isn't a random chaotic thing. It's a highly organized, structured form of differentiation of matter that requires intelligence to have ever
Yeah.
formed into
They want
something
to
like
pick and
that.
choose. They want to take a
Right.
part of a worldview and integrate it. So it's more of utilitarianism for them to take aspects of, I'm going to use
That's
some
right.
logic. I'm going to take that logic and my mathematics, these concepts that don't physically exist in the physical world, and apply them to my materialistic, deterministic worldview.
That's right.
So
That's
it's
exactly correct.
not a
I couldn't
starting
have said
point.
it any better.
You're
Very
providing
well
a
said.
transcendental argument that I don't think they would accept that they would. That's why they wouldn't accept your argument because it transcends the physical and it integrates a god, a creator into
Right.
the worldview, which to me helps unify the whole thing and make it make sense. It's
Yes,
not a religious notion. It's just
it
a
is not.
logical notion. It's reasonable.
And these people's worldview, it's coming from Newtonian materialism, which has since been long scientifically disproven. It's coming from Hegelianism. It's coming from Marxism, Marxist materialism, which is the underlying of all kinds of totalitarian beliefs, namely communism, etc. It's coming from a Darwinistic worldview as well. And all of these, again, as you said, lead to deterministic worldview. This is the worldview schism. Is it deterministic or is it random? Okay. And it could in the left brain schism, it could be either one of those things: pure randomness and chaos, or total determinism based on materialism and matter. Even in the religious worldview, it could be completely deterministic because, oh, in their worldview, God controls everything, is all knowing, is all seeing, is all powerful. And so all choice is preordained and predetermined. So where's the role of free will? The truth is in neither one of those extremity positions. The truth is a unified form of a worldview that is arrived at through reason and through investigation into the laws of nature. And it is both has a component that is deterministic and a component that is random somewhat. And that is the deterministic component is natural law. There are laws that are inescapable in their consequence. So is if I take this piece of paper and I let it go, does it fall downward toward the center of the earth? Yes, it does. That's a law that is operating as long as we are here on earth. You know, it's deterministic. It's a function of the natural realm and how it is structured where we are at right now. You go off into space and you hold this and it'll just hover there because the gravitational force of the earth is not going to apply to it there. That's still a law. That's still how the laws of nature are operating in the domain where you are currently at. It's not random. That's the deterministic component of the laws of matter. The same applies to behavior. They're not random. They're deterministic. They work a certain way all the time everywhere in the universe. So that's the deterministic component, natural law, the governing dynamics of behavioral consequence for intelligent beings, for holistically intelligent beings who have the capacity for holistic intelligence and reason and the understanding of the difference between right and wrong behavior. The randomness component is free will because, I could exercise free will and snap these eyeglasses in half for no reason. I could also not do that and place them back down on the desk. I could take that piece of paper that I just held and tear it in a million pieces, even though it has important information on it that I want to keep. I'm going to exercise my free will not to do that. It's the same thing when it comes to natural law and how we interact with consequential law of behavior. We exercise the randomness component and we try to do it not randomly. We try to do it in an ordered fashion that is based in the understanding of the law. So, again, as I said, if you do understand the laws of electromagnetism, you are not going to take a metal object like a butter knife and insert it with a bare hand into an electrical outlet. You're not going to go to a high tension power line that just may have come down and you see sparking and it's all, live, obviously, and go grab it like that, unless you want to die. So the understanding of the law means we exercise our free will in an intelligent capacity. If you know that there's a jagged, rocky bottom to 1,000-foot cliff, you don't go and do a triple somersault over the edge of the cliff because you're going to be dead when you hit the bottom, because you know how the law of gravity operates in this space. So,
well, even if you don't know how it operates, you can observe it. Like that one's more observable, but
you could throw a ball.
I might not be able to describe it correctly.
Throw a basketball off and watch it explode when it hits the jagged rocks. But I don't have to know
the mathematics behind it. Like, so
correct.
Even just like human beings living together a certain way, I can observe ways that work and ways that are very destructive. And I don't have to go as deep as you've gone, like you said, obsessively seeking. But, people don't want to accept it. So that, like in your presentation, I wanted to go into a little bit here, two masks, same face. We don't want to accept what these behaviors of humanity does on a mass scale. And we're about to basically repeat the same thing that you discussed in that presentation. How have your thoughts changed, or looking back on that presentation since doing it pretty recently? What are some thoughts on the overall presentation and how it went? And
I'd have to say it was well received by my community of people and people who want to open up their mind and their worldview to understanding how totalitarianism actually results in our world, how it progresses and how it results, and how it is driven by sick, occult religious worldviews, meaning worldviews that are hidden and eventually express in completely devastatingly destructive ways to human freedom and life. But they originate as occult belief systems that are brewing and bubbling under the surface of our society. And I gave that was like an 8-hour presentation on the underpinnings within occult belief systems and occult societies that led to the formation of both the Nazi Third Reich and the Soviet Union and communist China, and just worldwide communism in general. The Bolshevik Revolution leading to the Soviet Union, and now, the Chinese Communist Party. So there is devastating, colossal proof that these ideologies were not just things that came out of regular society, but were fomented deliberately by occult orders and dark occult practitioners. I went into it in painstaking, incredibly deeply researched detail that took 8 hours to unfold and unpack. And I would say that while the small percentage that comprises what I would again call the natural law-based freedom community responded to it very well. Did it really change minds on any kind of a mass scale or get people interested in this understanding of this aspect of occultism in a wider way? No. They're very rigidly attached to their religious belief systems, and they don't even think that they have religious beliefs. All of these people would describe themselves as non-religious, non-spiritual, even atheist, materialist, and yet they have the most deeply held cultish absolute cult-driven religious minds of anybody that I could even cite. That's how rigidly attached they are to completely religious notions. False belief systems that don't do anybody any good, that don't progress humanity, that don't get you to the state that you say you want to go to. It's just erroneous thinking leading to completely distorted results. This just really comes from not knowing how to think. It comes from distortion of thought. When you have distorted thought, your outcomes are all going to be skewed and off. It's like if you're a computer programmer and you get one period in the wrong place, you get one semicolon in the wrong place, you get one comma in the wrong place, your whole program is done. It's shot. It doesn't work right. This is why being correct and having a methodology for being correct is so critically important. You have to understand how to arrive at the truth. That's epistemology. Ontologically, you have to have a accurate view of reality in general. You have to be ontologically sound and not be just driven by fantasy and completely fantastic views of how things work in the world. You can't be driven by dreaming and illusion. So, even before you start an ontological process, you have to have somewhat of a healthy mindset. An epistemological process. You have to have somewhat of a healthy ontology. Once you then start exploring epistemologically, you have to arrive at an understanding of how we arrive at truth, and that is through the trivium process. The trivium process means you first have to gather all the data, the grammar. You have to gather the information. People are talking about things that they have no information about. They're trying to say that they know how things work when they haven't even gathered the grammar to themselves. They haven't read the material. They haven't read the information. They haven't even gathered the information, let alone poured through it. They haven't performed the second stage of the trivium, which is pouring through all the data once you've gathered it and sifting through it and weeding out logical inconsistencies and logical fallacies from the data set to arrive at an accurate understanding of what all the data means. You have to gather it all. You have to sift through it. You have to weed out all of the things that don't make sense to come to a logical, sensible conclusion about what it actually means. That's the understanding process. And then once you do that, your job is just beginning because you have to act rightly upon the data set and the understanding of the data set. That's the trivium. Right action is wisdom. That's the third step. So it's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. People are trying to jump right to the action aspect, the rhetoric of the trivium, without gathering the grammar of the trivium in the first stage and garnering a correct understanding of the data set in the second stage. They're not even performing the two first steps of the trivium in the correct order, and they can never be taken out of that order. It's knowledge, understanding, wisdom. Another way of saying it is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And if you want to look at it in the modern sense, I look at it in a computer analogy sense. It's input, processing, and output. You got to input the data, process it in the computer, doing the logical transforms that it's going to do with its processing capability. And then you got to output it in a structured form on the screen and then off to the internet so that other people can learn from it. This is how we learn and grow. This is the resistance in the so-called freedom community. They don't want to perform the scientific methodology. They just want to formulate a nonsensical belief and run with it and then act on it. And you think you're going to get orderly results based in freedom and prosperity? You're going to get disorganized chaos in every aspect of your life because you don't know how to think properly, because the school system fucked up your brains with indoctrination, didn't teach you the correct methodology of learning and truth discovery. And then you're running with that ball blindly, not knowing where you're taking yourself and the rest of society as a result.
I like how you said you have to do it in order, but then also I would just push back a little and say, but you also have to go back and fix the bugs in the computer analogy, right? So you had some input and then you processed it into some output and it was pretty good, but you noticed there was some issues. So yes, it needs to be done in order, but it's also not done in order because you got to go back, and we also
Yes.
can't collect all the grammar in the first go, right? You were saying earlier, even yourself is still doing some internal work, still dealing with trauma, still dealing with past history, still learning. You never really stop
Yes.
going down that path. Yes, we can come to conclusions. We were talking about worldviews earlier, which are conclusions that you're putting forward. It's not that they're unmovable. It's just they're more foundational in what you're putting forward. But doesn't mean if I'm learning about the trivium itself that I don't go back and go, I never really thought about that. And I never really looked at it this way. So I got to kind of modify things in how I'm putting this forward. And so with the
Correct.
trivium, I've seen a lot of issues myself with people sort of claiming that now that they understand what the trivium is, that now I've got the like you said, they'll skip over the grammar, the logic, and jump to a lot of conclusions still. So I love the trivium method. I think it is a great tool, but I also see it being misused.
Yes, absolutely. And that's because people aren't doing that refinement on the data set and the transforms that they apply to it. Again, it is a process that is going to be revised as new information comes to light. But it also doesn't mean that you stay silent forever just because you don't have the totality of everything. You want to act upon what you have determined is true, what you have determined to the best of your ability is true, and put that out there for other people to learn from. And that's how the scientific community should work. We put our results out, and then they are tweaked and refined as new information is brought to light, and new conclusions are then published. So it's always a matter of refining the process and refining the rhetoric that goes hand in hand with the process. So absolutely, that's very correct, as you stated.
Keeping it in the technical vein, we need technical skills in this battle. What is your perception on how people are using technical skills or not using their lack of technical skills in this battle?
I am fighting not to put my head in my hands right now. It is one of the things that I harp on endlessly almost every single solitary day. The ignorance when it comes to the utilization of technology in our world is so colossal, so profound, so overwhelming that I want to cry. It makes me want to weep into my hands. I don't know how else I could state it. I can't overstate how bad that is, that condition. And I just see people every single day. They have no idea how to use a computer. They have no idea how to just even catalog the simplest of data. They have no idea how to even basically take a digital photo and put it in a folder. They have no idea how to pay for something electronically. They have no idea how to use cryptocurrency. They can't print anything. They don't know how to make a PDF document. Forget about using a digital camera or video camera or publishing something on the internet or, God forbid, making a website. I mean, technical ignorance is one of the hallmarks of why we're being defeated. It's one of the underlying main reasons why freedom's being destroyed. Because the average person is a Luddite moron when it comes to technology and publishing. And they still haven't even made the connection that the truth has to get out there through technological means. You're not going to tell your neighbor something by word of mouth with no formalization, with no immortalizing of the data and information, and not put it online for other people to inspect and learn from. And it's fleeting, it's ephemeral, it's gone in an instant. And they believe that's how the truth's going to get out there into the world. Not through technology, not through learning how to publish, not through putting things online, putting things in places that can't be censored, that are going to really be eternal, like blockchain technology, at least to the extent that as long as the planet exists and the internet exists along with it. How people can't come to the conclusion that the solution, which is teaching people objective morality and natural law, has a technological component, which is the means and methodology to get the word out to the public. It's like their brains literally can't come to logical conclusions because they've been so damaged, literally brain-wise. The mind and brain have been damaged chemically. They're like chemically lobotomized in a way. And again, that takes unbelievably hard work to come out of, but it is possible. The brain is plastic. The mind is plastic. And I don't mean literal plastic. Plasticity means it can come back from damage. Okay. And in the forms of damage that we're talking about, it is very possible with hard effort, with hard work, to improve the plasticity of the brain and the mind and bring them into better conditions. It is not impossible to improve people. A dumb person can be turned into a smart person. It is definitely, absolutely possible, but it's one of the hardest things to do in life. I'm living proof of it. I was not a smart person in my youth. I may have had the capacity for intelligence, but I was not utilizing that capacity. I was believing things that were told to me and jumping from one belief system to another. Now I have actual intelligence that I have worked and honed through the trivia method, through deep study. This is not something that just comes to you in an instant, in a flash of lightning, you know, or some Satori moment of awakening. This took years of brutal hard work and sacrifice to come out of a pre-existing mindset and heal my mind and my brain and my worldview and my soul and work toward the betterment of my life and my understanding of things. That's what the whole purpose of life. This is what the ultimate long-term goal and purpose of life on this planet is about: learning and growth as a being, as a soul. And people still haven't gotten that. They think it's collecting the most toys or the most money or the most comfort. I mean, if you believe that, you know, absolute selfish and self-serving worldview of life is the correct one, that's again complete and utter delusion. This comes from a complete materialist worldview, and again, that's the worldview schism that has to be healed. This isn't about materialism. This isn't about matter as being prime and everything being spiritless, soulless. You know, it isn't about believing in that God controls everything and he has these things he doesn't want you to do. And, and the church tells you exactly what those things are, or the synagogue tells you what those things are to do or not do. It's like, we have to understand that natural law is not written in any religious text. It's written on the human heart. It's written in the human soul. That's what, in the biblical scriptures, Jesus meant when he said the kingdom of God is within. You're going to find those answers by turning inward, not looking outward to religious answers or scientific answers. We need a holistic worldview that brings together an understanding of natural law and free will, of science and spirituality, because they're not different. They're one thing operating together to bring us the results of what we are going to experience and learn and grow from in life. And people have just not made that worldview schism healing and that worldview change, that transcendental change mechanism has not really taken off and worked through them yet, because they're still clinging to dead religious belief systems, regardless of what form they take.
And you put your money where your mouth is. You teach a class how to become the true media, actually trying to help people improve their technological skills. So wasn't just bashing people. You're actually out there trying to help people that want to learn. And I took the class. It was a wonderful class. And absolutely overwhelming, by the way. There's just so much information that you provided.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, it can be a lot to take in, but we have to start somewhere and build our understanding. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging. It's not something that I expect people to just immediately get. You have to work at it like anything else. Like if you're going to go and hit the gym and, get in shape, you got to work at it. You're not going to see the results immediately. You'll see the results down the line as you habituate the process and do it more and more. Practice leads us closer to being perfect. We're never going to arrive at a condition of perfection. This is one of the things I teach in the seminar, is that there's no such thing as perfection. You're not trying to strive or arrive at perfection. You're trying to compete with yourself from yesterday and better yourself and have a better understanding of what to do. I ask people in the freedom movement, how do you think ideas about freedom are going to propagate themselves. And the answers that you get are honestly, they're just the stupidest things that you've ever heard. We're going to vote somebody into office. We'll get people to start going to church again. Just telling it to your children and your family is the answer. I've never heard more ridiculous, nonsensical things drool out of people's mouths. And again, there's no easy way of telling this to people. Like, how do you tell somebody that's really, really, really dumb? That's really stupid because they haven't logically thought it through. If you don't understand technology, you don't know how to publish things that can reach millions of people's eyes, ears, and minds, and then change them internally, help to change them internally. You're not going to immediately change them. You're going to give them the tool set by which and through which they can change themselves. But if that's not out there, what is out there? All the propaganda of the mainstream media, all the propaganda of the government and the school systems and the false scientific systems and the false religions. They have all their systems of broadcasting to people's minds in place and active. And you think you're going to cut through all of that tech, you're going to cut through all of that bombardment of their false message and false religion and their mind control methodology by speaking something to your next door neighbor that they'll never hear again. You have to publish online. You have to go public. You have to speak out publicly. You have to record what you say. There has to be a record of the things that you've taught. You have to publish it in books. You have to publish it in videos. You have to publish it in audio. You have to publish it in presentation and lecture form. And you have to immortalize it by putting it on uncensorable areas of the internet, which involves more likely than not some type of blockchain technology by which it's going to act as a ledger of data and information for posterity into the future. I don't know how anybody can come to any other logical conclusion. And the reason they don't is because they're not thinking logically. They don't know how to think progressionally, one step at a time through. They can't take it like that because they've never been taught to. They've never been taught how to think. They've only been taught what to think. These are the same people that think that the answer is going to come in this form. Mark, you're not teaching solutions because you haven't said, Jim or Sally, this is step number one. I'm going to write it down for you. And that's step one that you have to take in the world. And I've given you step one. Now, after you're done step one, I'm going to write down step two for you on a list. And then you're going to go do that. That's not how life and any solutions work, ladies and gentlemen. We have to understand the true solutions from a conceptual point of view first. This is why in How to Become the True Media, where I teach people technology on how to become content creators so that they can publish their findings online regarding the state of our world and how to truly fix that condition. We have to, I lost my train of thought briefly. I was talking about how to become the true media and where was I going with it? The first step, the first idea, the first tenet of what I teach in How to Become the True Media is this isn't something that you do in step one, step two, step three, like a grocery list. Okay. The first tenet of How to Become the True Media is the concept is king. If you cannot think conceptually, if you cannot understand unifying principles and ideas, you're not going to understand the tasks and the steps that have to come later as a result of your understanding of concept. This is why I tell people a computer task that you might want to do to put something online, let's say, is going to involve certain pieces of software. It will involve an operating system, a piece of software, and usually a workflow of some kind, a method by which you're going to do this task. You don't just jump to the task. You don't make just an SOP, a standard operating procedure that says, trained monkey, do this. Step one, do this. Step two, do this. You can do that, but is the person going to walk away with an accurate understanding of why that was necessary to do? No. They're just going to act as a trained monkey. Nobody should act as a trained monkey, because you know what that is? That's an order follower. Order followers are trained monkeys. I don't want an army of order followers. I want an army of intelligent people who understand conceptually why this is the answer and why we need to implement it. They have to be autodidactic. That means they're ultimately teaching themselves. We're giving them the tools and the building blocks, but they're teaching themselves how to do it. I don't want trained order followers. That's the exact opposite of what I want. I want trained order followers eradicated from existence, and not necessarily physically, but choosing not to become people like that and not to go into those professions. So what we teach in How to Become the True Media is the number one thing is to understand what you are doing from a conceptual framework, meaning the steps might change tomorrow. If the operating system changes, you might have a completely different workflow tomorrow. If the software program changes, you're not going to go through the same steps and menus and buttons. What if software is discontinued and it no longer works after a certain period of time and you can't stay on the same computer forever? So eventually you have to move to a new piece of software to accomplish the task in technology and computing. Well, if you don't know conceptually what to do, you're looking at the computer program and you're like, I don't know how to work this. But conceptually, if you know what to do, you can figure it out in 2 minutes. I've looked at programs this year on How to Become the True Media. I opened up a desktop publishing software program that I had never used once, ever. And I've used things like Quark Express. I've used things like Adobe InDesign. I've used things like Apple's Pages, Microsoft Word for it, although I don't think that's a great tool for that task. But I've used the industry standard stuff for those tasks, and I used to do that professionally. I opened up a piece of software that I had never launched and made a page layout using that software in minutes. How? Because I don't just study tasks like a trained monkey going about step one, step two, step three, step four. That's not logical, organized thinking based in truth discovery methods. That's laziness. And this is what the freedom community is and does and wants. They want to remain lazy. That's why they don't want to learn technology. That's why they don't want to become broadcasters. That's why they think somebody else is going to solve it when they vote them in, or it's going to all get solved when we reform the finance system. They're delusional people. You have to understand things from an underlying causal and conceptual framework first, or you do not understand how things truly work or why they work that way. That's why a person who doesn't understand the conceptual principles of desktop publishing is not going to open up a piece of software that they've never seen before and figure out how to make an organized layout that they're ready to print in 5 to 10 minutes. Somebody who understands conceptually how that software is supposed to work and works, and if the developer is laying things out in somewhat of a logical layout, interface-wise, they will learn that technology in minutes, not hours or even days, in minutes, because conceptually they know the concepts involved. It's the same thing when it comes to human behavior and freedom. You have to understand the underlying conceptual framework and the underlying laws. If you don't understand that from a natural perspective in the realm of point of fact nature and how it operates, you are wandering blindly through a desert of dead ideology. And you're not learning and you're not growing and you're not progressing in your understanding and you're certainly not implementing a true solution. This is where my work is differentiated from other people. And because it's more difficult to grasp, because most people are those trained monkeys or want to be those trained monkeys and don't want to think at a higher conceptual level, most influencers who want to reach the maximum amount of people and who want to do things from the lowest common denominator approach don't want to discuss the ideas that I discuss. They don't want to bring me on. They don't want to have that discussion. They want to talk to trained monkeys who they can tell, do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, like the trained monkey you are who doesn't even understand why the hell you're doing what you're doing. That's not part of the solution, ladies and gentlemen. That's doing more harm in the world. And I'm going to continue to say that until eventually it hits their heart. Maybe their heart will be melted at some point, to a point. Maybe you need to see way more people shot dead. And I'm telling you, if you think that's bad, you don't know what war is going to be. You're people who think what we saw yesterday with Charlie Kirk was bad.
Yeah.
You don't know what war is going to be. You have no conceptualization mentally what it's going to involve and be and look like. None whatsoever. Because it will be so infinitely fucking worse than that. You won't even, you can't imagine it from the place you're at. And I'm saying that with the utmost serious and the utmost gravitas in my voice.
Right.
Because I'm trying to avert that, So all of the influencers out there, you want to understand why this is happening? You want the solution to be implemented so it doesn't happen anymore? You better start talking about natural law from a very serious perspective. And this is really, again, symbolically what the G in the middle of the compasses and square in Freemasonry is about. I've told people it ultimately does stand for the generative principle. You have to care enough. You have to care. You have to deeply inside of your being, you have to care so much for the truth, and you have to care for what the real solutions are. You need to stop analyzing the results, the effects. They're over and done with. Nothing's going to bring an assassinated man back to life. But we can understand the causal factors that led to this from a moral perspective and start talking about those things instead of political and financial analysis, which isn't leading humanity anywhere except into deeper chains. That's where that's leading people, not into a state of true freedom. So that's what I hope will eventually unfold. Maybe their hearts will eventually be touched and melted somehow. I don't know if that's in the cards. But I do know the path that we're on as far as what people are doing and what influencers are doing and how they're trying to garner audiences. I'm not worried about a big audience. I want this message to get out. Of course, I want to be able to keep my operation running and to keep a roof over my head, and people would dare say you can't, make any resources from this. Like you're supposed to be some pauper. Like you're supposed to be some person that doesn't have 2 cents to rub together, so I can't even buy resources that I need to do this work, or to pay a mortgage on a house to keep a roof over my head and feed myself. The nerve of people like that. You don't know what's involved because you haven't lifted a fucking finger. That's the real thing that hits home. You want to call people who are really doing this kind of work and asking for donations for resources. You want to call them like names and say that they're not genuine because they're telling you that they need resources to continue an operation based in telling the truth. People have no idea what's involved in any part of this because you know how much they've done of it? Fucking zero. Zero. They haven't lifted a pinky finger. They've sat on their asses and complained is what they've done. And they've complained about the people who are actually involved in the battle when they've been sitting on their lazy asses doing nothing. And that's why I've been so hard on people. And those are the factors that really need to change if we're going to get out of this mess.
Yeah, I see people want the infotainment, like you're saying, and the influencers are playing right into that. And they'll think that off-gridding or getting on some solar panels or getting some goats and chickens is part of the solution. And I think what the part of the issue is they may want to affect real change in the world, but the focus and concentration that it would take them to get into the skill sets that you're talking about is overwhelming to them. And so maybe that's part of the aspect of care. But let's talk about focus and concentration in getting into that work. And, the lack of that. And I think what people are doing out gardening potatoes and stuff is somewhat easier and like less
Of course
resistance
it
into
is.
going into that behavior. It's not like it's easy. I'm not saying that. It's just it's kind of like a natural way to just be, and then but you're not affecting change on the wider scale though. And I think
Correct.
part of it is not just that they don't care, but also just that focus and concentration muscle has not been built. It's not there. So that they when they sit down to do like you're saying, they're looking for a task, and it kind of starts to melt away
Yep.
the commitment to this sitting at a desk
Plus,
thing. It's a
if
lot of
they look
sitting
at what
here.
yes, if they look at what the real great work is to do, they're often put off by it. They realize
Right.
intuitively and subconsciously how difficult a task we are really up against. Listen to what the task is, ladies and gentlemen. If you want one overarching task, this is it. You must dissolve away in your own mind and then in all other people's minds religious thought. That's the great work. That is what has to happen. Think about how difficult that is, how clinging to the death people are of nonsensical religious ideas that is burned into their burnt brains. It is burnt in there so deep that it is one of the most challenging things to get them to see reason and to get them to see truth. They don't want to. They've installed that virus software program into the mind deliberately because they don't want the responsibility that comes hand in hand with knowing the truth and the real solution and knowing how difficult that is to do. And again, when I'm talking, I want to just go back to that brief symbolism that I was starting to unpack for a moment. The G in the middle of the compasses and square is not only about the generative principle of care, which I've talked about in my work. I call that the lost or eighth principle of the Hermetic principles, which is a tradition that talks about natural law and the underpinning um, principles that really lay under it as a foundation for its expression in the world. And I think that they are missing the most important of all the principles, and that's what do we deeply care about? We could talk about rhythm and gender and consequence, um, correspondence, etc., all day. But if we don't talk about what drives the heart, we're missing the biggest unifying factor. What we care about enough to actually try to do in the world, to make an effort, is what will ultimately manifest. And if we don't care enough, it will not manifest. So, do we care enough to change people's minds so that it puts them in the mindset of a true understanding of how freedom works and how natural law works? Do we actually care enough to do that? Or do we just want the easy route and say, I'm going to try to live as off grid as possible so that people don't bother me until the world is completely destroyed, and then eventually they come and eat me and devour me in the process? It's like, that's not the answer. Isolation is not the answer. Engagement is the answer. That's why you think I agree with a political analysis and commentator like Charlie Kirk. I don't. I don't share his views on just about anything politically. I'm a radical anarchist that rejects the notion of authority entirely, because I understand authority is a claim of ownership on another being and completely usurping their free will, and that's not called authority. That's a euphemism. It's a euphemism for the real thing that it is, slavery. I don't accept or believe in the moral legitimacy of slavery. But if you don't understand that's a completely reprehensible, immoral act, there's something broken in your brain and your heart and in your soul. And the point is, what I did respect about the man, he's having a discourse with people. He's not just jumping to violence. He's trying to explain his point of view. I have respect for anybody that could do that in an intelligible way. So this is tragic. This is nothing to celebrate. This is horrifying, and it's going to get infinitely more horrifying. This is the very beginning. This is first shots fired, ladies and gentlemen. If you think it's not going to get worse from here on out based on the mindset that is out there, you're nuts. Okay? So the G not only represents the generative principle of care, which drives everything. It underlies all of our behavior in life. It literally means gravity. And I don't just mean that from the perspective of the force of nature, of the physical force of gravity. But that is the unifying force, right? That's what physicists have been looking for. The quantum theory of gravity, the unified field theory, whatever you want to call it. The force that unifies all of the forces of physical forces of nature is gravity. And it means gravity, but not in that sense. It means gravity from the sense of this is important. This has gravity. This has weight. This has gravitas. This is serious. This is not a joke. This is not a game. This is not social hour or a social scene. This is not anything that should be taken lightly. This is something that should be taken with extreme seriousness and gravity. That's the other thing that the G in the middle of the compasses and square is. And that's what the generative principle is. And that's what natural law is. It is the unifying field. It is the unifying law. Care is what unifies everything. If we don't understand that, we're lost. And that's what people have to start talking about. They have to start talking about the true esoteric, causal, underlying principles that are the ultimate causal factors and the ultimate conceptual ideas that need to be understood, not political and financial analysis or new tech or new ways of growing food or getting off grid. If you think those are the answers and the solutions, I hate to break the news to you, but you're going around in yet another religion, in another box for consciousness. You're in another trap. You're in another cul-de-sac. The influencers out there have to get on to the understanding of natural law if you're going to change anything in this life. And if you want, I will help to bring that understanding to the public. I personally don't even want to do this anymore. I haven't wanted to do this for a long time. I feel like I've said everything I've ever needed to say or want to say. All I can do is rehash and reword things in slightly different ways to help people get a better understanding of it. That is torture. It's something that I recognize needs to be done, but when you really live your life on repeat like that, it's not fun. You don't enjoy it. You start to feel like it is a burden, and it is, because so few people have done it. If there were 1 million people doing this in the world, and I mean to my level every day, dedicating their lives to this, the dent that we would put in what's going on in our world would be colossal. I think 1 million people not even doing as good of a job as me, we'd reverse the course of our world within a couple of years. I've said this before. I've run these numbers in my mind because I have a very logically structured mind and a mathematical mind that can really see systems. I see things from a systems level. I would have been a good systems administrator. I was more of a desktop technician when I professionally did that. But I see whole systems at work. I would have been a good actuary, probably. I could have done that. I think I have a high enough IQ to do that. And I see patterns in things and whole systems logically enough that I could have probably done actuarial work. And, what people have to do is start seeing things from a higher level perspective and understand this is what has to be looked at and studied. I don't want to have to be the only person that does this. And again, the numbers that I've run, if we had about 1 million people doing a half decent job, you're right, not even at the level that I've pushed for this, if they did it even halfway decent, 1 million souls on this planet doing that and teaching natural law could probably change our reality for the better and create a state of freedom within a few years at my estimate. If we had I'm going to say between 1 and 5,000 people doing this at my level or even more dedicated, we would reverse course of the condition of humanity within 6 months. That's how fast the change would overtake. They would not be able to stop it from a consciousness perspective, from a change, from an overwhelming change in consciousness and worldview. That's how fast it would happen. We don't even have 100 people doing this at that level, not even 100 on the earth, on the whole planet. So people just have to open up their minds and start pressing for the real solution instead of all of these pseudo solutions and just all of this discussion and analysis of things that are not going to make the real change happen in this world. And it's a hard bubble to burst for people. It's a very hard thing for them to hear. They're very emotionally attached. They're egotistically attached. They're psychologically attached to these false solutions. And I'll end most of my interviews, or at least contain this in them. I implore the people with the really big audiences, reevaluate your life's work. You're not putting out the real solutions at all. You haven't been, and you're not now. Give your heart over to what the real solution needs to be. Study it. I'm not asking for belief. It's something that you can learn, you can study, you can understand how it works. You could even experiment within your own life, or even on a wider scale if you want. There's no belief required in this solution. You need to understand a law that is operating in nature. This is like telling people, understand how gravity works so you don't go off the edge of the cliff. You don't drive your car over the end of a broken bridge. If you know how gravity works, you're not going to do those things. Well, if you know how natural law works, you could tell people and teach people how to restructure their thought processes so that they don't fall for nonsense, garbage, incorrect, erroneous thoughts that are going to lead them nowhere except to a deeper prison in life. You teach people that, you're giving them the underlying causal factors for real change in the world. You keep teaching political and financial analysis. All you're doing is spinning around on a fucking hamster wheel going nowhere, and you're leading society down a blind alley. And that's not helping. That's doing harm.
Well, you're helping people get there by taking on a seminar that you're going to be hosting on shadow work.
Yes.
Tell us about the sacrifice and hardship that people can expect getting in to not only just shadow work, but the great work, and a little bit about your seminar as well.
It's going to be one of the most difficult lectures, seminars, presentations for people to hear that I've ever put out. Let's just put it that way. Number one, it is going to take people who really want to listen. And listening is a gigantic part of shadow work. Learning to listen is a massive part of shadow work. And most people don't know how to listen, and that's why they don't know how to learn. I'll quote the Ramones: learn to listen to learn to listen before you get burned. From one of their best albums. I think that was Mondo Bizarro, the song Learn to Listen. They're not learning how to listen because they don't know how to quiet the mind and make space for learning. You can't this glass that I drained of the iced tea during this interview is empty now. You can fill it because it's empty. There's empty space and you can now fill it and put liquid in it. But this glass is largely full of water. You can't fill this glass full of orange juice. You could put that much in there, but it's going to be very diluted orange juice. You'd have to empty this glass first, make space, and then you could fill it with orange juice. It's the same with knowledge. The mind can't have competing thoughts in it, constantly chattering. Even when you're trying to learn, if there's competing thoughts to the learning process, you're not going to learn. The elitists The Satanists, the social engineers, they teach their children this method. They understand that if you have competing thoughts that are chattering and erroneous, you're not going to learn. You're not going to get the methods. You're certainly not going to devote yourself to anything that's going to make you receive and achieve your goals. This is our community, though. They don't have these methods in hand. And I'll give another Masonic allegory. And again, I've taught a lot of Freemasonry. I'm not a lodge Freemason. I hold no rank. I teach it as an allegorical system for morality and for change and learning and growth, as I do many other occult traditions. The idea of tiling the lodge is very important when it comes to shadow work. It's something I'm going to talk about in the presentation, among many, many other things. The tiler of the lodge is the person who goes and guards the door once the lodge meeting has begun, it has initiated. The lodge in Freemasonry, the actual building and the system of the lodge, is an allegory for the mind and the brain and how one's thought processes work to accomplish goals over time. That's what it is allegorically a symbol of. The tiler, who guards the entrance to the lodge and makes sure no one who's not a member and has direct business being in that lodge gets in that door, is an allegory for guarding the mind of intrusive thoughts. So that when we're going to do the work that we're going to do, and we're going to focus in like a laser and get the job done, follow things through to their logical conclusion until we have accomplished the task at hand and we have accomplished the work. The tiler guards against intrusive thoughts entering the mind. This is what we must learn to do. We must learn to tile the lodge here. And people haven't been taught to do that by their parents, by their teachers, by their friends and family members, by their colleagues and their clergy, etc. They've been given completely erroneous thoughts and processes for the mind that lead us into blind alleys and don't allow us to receive the goals and the results that we say we want to achieve. So the Shadow Work Seminar is going to be on November 11th, 2025. Enrollment is open at my website, whatonearthishappening.com. Enrollment has been abysmal. There's plenty of seats for anybody that wants to attend. While I shouldn't say that I'm very shocked, I thought that there would even be a better response, and there is not. It's not a good sign. So I'm not saying that for sympathy or for a bunch of people to enroll. I'm just telling you, people don't want this work. They don't want to do it. That's why we're losing. We can turn it around still at this very incredibly late hour. We can still turn it around. But at the stage that we're in and the direction I see things heading in, and people not wanting to do the real work and arrive at the real solutions and talk about them with other people and really spread them through society, I would say prepare yourself for a lot more eventualities like we witnessed yesterday. Sadly.
Yeah, it's still a choice, and that we still have the question mark on the keyboard. So final question for you, Mark. What is your message to the next generation of truth seekers, of people coming down this path who are not as familiar with all the work that obviously you've gone through, not familiar with your work? Maybe they're just kind of getting into this, and they're looking at, maybe one day I could, get into that and help out with this problem. What's your message to that generation of people coming on board?
Very simple. Politics is a religious system of erroneous thought and a cult. Do not get involved with it and think that is in any way ever going to be a solution for humanity moving forward. Study true spirituality from a positive, light, occultic perspective, never latching on to one tradition, but studying morality from an eclectic and integral approach. Do internal work upon yourself to improve your own understanding of how life and nature work and the laws that govern our behavior, and improve and learn and grow. within yourself before trying to enact any other solutions externally. Then understand objective morality and natural law and teach that as far and as wide and as freely as possible. And try to influence people to those understandings and outcomes. And then we'll see an improvement in our world in a short factor of time, shorter than people would believe if that that ball is picked up and run with. It will happen so quickly and organically, we'll be shocked. The problem is not enough of us are currently doing that, nowhere near enough. So if you do want to get involved in that expansion of worldview and how that process starts to unfold, my website, whatonearthishappening.com, is there. All my information is up there for free. Start with the podcast section. Listen and view my podcasts in order at your own pace. Watch all of my video lectures and seminars. The worldview will unfold for you and you will understand. It is all there if you want it. You have to want it. You have to care enough for truth to want that badly enough to take the time and make the sacrifice to go through that material and much of the other material that I talk about and expose in my lectures and presentations. And you will get it, and a new worldview will unfold, and all the methodologies that you can then employ are also all there. So that's my advice to especially the young people out there. And I guess that's a good place that we could leave it.
Absolutely. And I would just say it's 100% worth your time and energy and attention to go through from the beginning. Mark's podcast from number 1. He's got it on the website, so it's at the top. As soon as you click podcast, you can start your journey. I've gone through it probably at least 2.5 times completely. And then obviously all the other work that you've put out outside of the podcast. So definitely worth your time to go through and take Mark up on that offer. Any final thoughts, Mark, before we
Tyler, I want to just say thank you for all of your efforts. I enjoy having you on One Great Work Network. The production that you have done through content creators that you've worked with is phenomenal. Your own work is phenomenal. Keep that up. All we can do is continue to try. And I just want to thank you for extending the opportunity to me to be interviewed here today. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
You got it.
Merkabra.